Mobsters aren't known for being nice guys. Throughout history, they have been linked to various violent crimes. The best mafia hitmen have made people vanish without a trace. Being ruthless is part of the trade. But who are the most ruthless mobsters of them all? We took a look through our mafia history books and rounded up 5 of the most notorious crime figures who were beyond brutal when they needed to be. From the infamous Albert Anastasia to the deranged Thomas Pitera, these stories of ruthlessness will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's see who the most ruthless mobsters in history were. Let's start off our video with one of the most ruthless mobsters in history. Albert Anastasia was one of the most feared crime figures of his era. He was responsible for many hits and used brutal tactics with them. On top of being a mafia boss, he was also a skilled hitman who would resort to torture and murder. It's believed that Albert Anastasia was responsible for the murders of tens of thousands of people. He was known to kill many rivals during his time, but before he became boss of the Gambino family, Albert was co-founder and later boss of an organized crime group called Murder Inc. It's believed that this group is responsible for the murders of nearly 1,000 people, including notorious gangster Dutch Schultz. It wasn't just rival mafia members that were on Albert Anastasia's hit list. Anyone who made trouble for him would get hit. In 1939, when he was with Murder Inc., and Louis Buchalter was the head at the time, Morris Diamond was a Teamster Union official who was against Louis Buchalter's attempts to control the garment district in Manhattan. It is believed that Albert Anastasia ordered a hit on Morris Diamond because of this. One of his most notorious plans was the assassination of Abe Relez. Abe Relez was a gangster who connected Albert with hitmen. When Abe was busted by authorities, he agreed to testify to avoid the death penalty. Now, this was a problem for Albert because the gangster had a lot of information on him and others involved in organized crime. Allegedly, Albert offered $100,000 for the murder of Abe Relez. Already fearful for his life, Abe was staying in a guarded hotel room, but security guards aren't enough to stop a mafia hitman. These expert killers can get past any challenge to get their target. Abe Relez's dead body was found on a restaurant roof outside the hotel he was staying at. Although a grand jury ruled that he died by accident, many officials believe that he was murdered. While Albert Anastasia was responsible for a lot of mafia hits, his own death is one of the most mysterious. On October 25, 1957, he arrived at a barber shop in Manhattan. His driver left him unattended as he parked the car and went for a walk. At this point in time, Albert took a seat in the barber chair. 2 men with their faces covered entered the shop and pushed the barber out of the way and started firing shots at the mobster. Although Albert stood up and tried to lunge at one of the assassins, he was in too much shock and reached for the assailant's reflection in the mirror. The 2 men continued firing shots until the notorious crime boss was on the ground dead. To this day, it has not been discovered who was responsible for this hit. Many speculations have been made, and several mobsters throughout history have tried to take credit for the hit, but nobody has ever been convicted of the murder. The next ruthless mobster on our list is in a category of his very own. Greg Scarpa was a capo regime in the Colombo crime family. He was known as the Grim Reaper and the Mad Hatter. This is mainly because he was involved in a lot of criminal activity, like extortion, assault, and murder. This mobster was known for his brutality. It was believed that he could use brutal tactics to avoid prosecution. He has openly bragged about killing 20 people, but there's speculation he was involved in closer to 80 killings. While with the Colombo family, he formed his own crew that featured top-ranking members of the crime family. Many people thought that he wouldn't avoid prosecution forever. In 1962, he was arrested for armed robbery. This is when his case takes an interesting turn. Greg Scarpa ended up avoiding another prosecution by agreeing to work as an undercover informant for the FBI. By 1964, the FBI needed him for what would be one of his most important assignments, and what they needed for Greg Scarpa was to live up to his brutal mobster reputation. 3 men had gone missing in Mississippi, and authorities had reason to believe that the KKK was involved. The 3 men had traveled to Mississippi for the Freedom Summer Campaign, which was a campaign to help African Americans to register to vote. Authorities strongly believed that these men were murdered, but were unable to find the bodies. To make matters worse, they were facing public outrage over how long it was taking to find the bodies. Greg Scarpa arrived at a hotel in Mississippi where he was given a gun. He then informed his girlfriend that if he didn't come back, she should get a taxi to the airport to travel back to New York. But he wasn't gone very long. When Greg left, he allegedly went to the store where Lawrence Bird, a secret Klansman, worked as a TV salesperson. He kidnapped Lawrence Bird and took him to an army base, where he proceeded to beat him up and stick a gun barrel down his throat. Scared for his life, the Klansman caved and revealed where the bodies were. The ruthlessness of this mobster wasn't only valuable for the Mafia criminal enterprise. Authorities were also able to use Greg Scarpa's brutality to make other criminals crack. This former mobster ended up having a 30-year career as an undercover informant. When the cops ran out of other options, they would count on his brutality to scare people into revealing the information they needed. Unfortunately, his career came to an end in 1992 when he got arrested for violating state firearms laws. Allegedly, he shot a man who threatened his son. Greg Scarpa was sentenced to life in prison but passed away in 1994. One of the most feared mobsters on our list today is Roy DeMeo. He was involved with the Gambino crime family and was a vicious hitman that is believed to have killed around 70 people himself, while participating in the organization of around 100 murders. He also worked alongside the Iceman, hitman Richard Kuklinski. Roy DeMeo was a very dangerous figure in the mob. It wasn't just his body count that terrified people, it was how he treated murder as an art. He created the perfect way to kill people and dispose of their bodies, which was called the Gemini Method. Roy DeMeo named the process after the Gemini Lounge, a popular hangout spot where they carried out the majority of these hits. The Gemini Method was a group act, perfectly executed by Roy DeMeo and his crew. They would start by bringing their victim in through the club door. One hitman would appear and shoot the victim in the head with a silenced pistol. Then they would use a towel to wrap around their head and stop the blood from making a mess. Another hitman's role would be to stab the victim in the heart. This was a necessary step because it would stop the flow of blood to the head wound. The victim would then be taken to a bathtub, where they would drain the blood and chop the body up into smaller pieces. The gang would then wrap pieces of the body up in plastic and place them in boxes. Then the boxes would be taken to the dump. As they killed more people, the entire crew became experts at using the Gemini Method and leaving no traces behind to connect them to the murders. While this seemed like the perfect plan, things took a different turn in the early 1980s. The authorities were investigating multiple missing persons cases that were linked to the Gambino family. Around this time, it's believed that some of Roy DeMeo's gang members and several associates of the Gambino family had become informants. They were providing authorities tips that led them to the Gambino family and the Gemini Lounge. It's believed that the Gambino's boss, Paul Castellano, wanted to hire someone to take care of Roy. However, he had trouble because even the top hitmen associated with the Gambino family were afraid. Roy DeMeo was known to have expert killers around him at all times. But his reputation wasn't enough to keep him safe. Roy DeMeo knew he was drawing in heat, and it caused him to become increasingly paranoid. Allegedly, he even considered faking his death. On January 10, 1983, he attended a meeting and was never seen alive again. 10 days later, his partially frozen body was discovered in the trunk of his Cadillac Coupe de Ville, with a chandelier on top of it. It was never officially discovered who was responsible for Roy DeMeo's murder. There have been many theories throughout the decades, and the Iceman has even been said to be responsible. Paul Castellano was indicted for the murder, but he was killed in 1985. We're going way back in the Mafia history books with the next notorious crime figure on our list. Benny Siegel, most famously known as Bugsy Siegel, built a criminal empire before he went on to build a casino in Las Vegas. In 1918, he joined Murder Inc., a group of Jewish mobsters that organized contract killers. By the 1920s, he became involved with the Luciano family. At this point in time, they were newly established. Bugsy was a key player in the crime organization because he was running bootlegging and gambling rackets. But that wasn't the only thing of value that he brought to the crime family. Bugsy was known for pulling off assassinations. It's believed that he wanted to kill many of New York's veteran gangsters. He was even one of the 4 hitmen who took out Joe the Boss Masseria. A lot of people were afraid of Bugsy, including the people around him. He was known for having mood swings and a vile temper. By the late 1930s, Bugsy had conquered New York and moved his bootlegging and gambling rackets over to Los Angeles. While he was thriving in LA, Las Vegas caught his attention in the 1940s. He had heard about the Flamingo, a casino under construction that ran out of cash. Bugsy believed that he could have a lot of success with this casino, but he needed help from the mob to get enough money to cover costs. They initially agreed to help when he quoted a $1 million budget. However, the construction costed a lot more than Bugsy imagined, and to make matters worse, his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, was allegedly stealing funds from the project. It ended up costing $6 million. Bugsy had a really challenging start with the casino, and there was talk that the Mafia wasn't happy about how much the project cost. Did they make him pay for this casino with his life? On June 20th, 1947, Bugsy was shot to death in his girlfriend's house in Beverly Hills. A gunman fired 9 shots through the window, and 4 of them hit Bugsy. The shooter has never been discovered. The last ruthless mobster on our list is one of the most deranged. Thomas Pitera was nicknamed the Butcher. This mobster wasn't just good at killing, he enjoyed it. He was known to keep souvenirs from his killings, like wedding bands, to hold as trophies. It's believed that he killed around 60 people when he was working with the Bonanno family. What makes the Butcher a unique hitman is that he was trained in martial arts. He was a brutal killer who didn't think twice about using torture or intimidation tactics. If anyone crossed him or knew too much about what he did, they would face his wrath. He also killed people to get himself ahead. It's believed that he would kill drug dealers, then steal their stash and sell it for profit. Many people described him as a psychopath, and nobody trusted him when he was around. Even in social settings, people would never turn their back to him out of fear. One of the wildest stories about this Mafia hitman is that he allegedly took a bath with one of his victims as he dismembered the body. This story was told by a Bonanno associate, Frank Gangi, who ended up betraying the Butcher. As the bodies piled up, authorities were suspicious of Thomas Pitera. Eventually, an investigation was launched, and after 3 years, he was arrested. Tips from Frank Gangi helped authorities locate some of the bodies of his victims. In 1992, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 6 people and supervising a drug operation. He is still in prison today. Each of the mobsters that we talked about today were brutal in their own way. Albert Anastasia had a reputation for being one of the most feared and ruthless. His expertise was planning out the murders. He was organized and well-connected, allowing him to perfectly execute hits. Greg Scarpa could use his brutal tactics to intimidate people into telling him anything he wanted to know and doing whatever he said. Not only did the Mafia find him to be a valuable asset to the world of organized crime, but the FBI also found his ruthless style to be needed for solving cases. If they couldn't find a missing person, they could use Greg Scarpa to intimidate the people who knew. Roy DeMeo was a strategist when it came to how he killed. Many of his victims seemed to have vanished out of thin air. That's because he came up with a plan to take them out and not leave any traces behind. Bugsy Siegel has a violent temper and the initiative to kill. He wanted to be one of the guys that assassinated New York's veteran gangsters. That drive could have been what led him to be so ruthless. Thomas Pitera found personal enjoyment in placing hits. He enjoyed the violence and torture, which caused many people to fear him. His brutality would often go too far. The legacy of the mobsters we covered today is of violence and fear. These brutal crime figures were responsible for some of the deadliest hits in history. They had strong reputations for their ruthless crimes. People are still fascinated by how these crimes played out to this day. However, each mobster we talked about is from a past era. Authorities are cracking down on the Mafia harder than ever before. These days, it's rare for mobsters to place hits. When they do, they are nowhere near as ruthless or violent as mobsters from the past. This wraps up our take on the stories of the ruthlessness displayed by Albert Anastasia, Greg Scarpa, Roy DeMeo, Bugsy Siegel, and Thomas Pitera. These were some of the most feared figures in Mafia history. Nobody wanted to get on the bad side of these infamous criminals. The people that did were never seen again. Thank you for staying tuned to the end of our video. Which one of these mobsters do you think was the most ruthless? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to see more Mafia Mystique content.